それでは続きまして。
Next, we will have a panel discussion on the approaches from the capital market side. From Tokyo Stock Exchange, we have Executive Vice President Mr. Yasuyuki KONUMA to serve as moderator. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much. It's a rather long program. You may be tired. This is the fourth panel discussion. So we hope that you would relax a bit. Personally, I feel that I want to make this a rather relaxed session. I seek your kind cooperation. Let me introduce the three panelists. From the Financial Services Agency, Chief Sustainable Financial Officer, Mr. Satoshi IKEDA, who is sitting closest to me, and Head of XEA Co-Chief Sustainability Officer, EMEA Co-Chief Sustainability Officer, the Norinchukin Bank, Mr. MASATO IMAI, Managing Executive Officer, Head of Global Banking and Head of EMEA Co-Chief Sustainability Officer. And next, Mr. TOMOHISA MURAKAMI, a Senior Managing Director, Investment Banking Product, Nomura Securities Company Limited. And as for this panel, this is the fourth panel discussion. So up until now, we've been discussing Asia as a whole and the position of Tokyo. And the issuer's perspective was also given, and financial intermediaries business was discussed. And so lastly, capital market, or more broadly, the financial service as a whole, an approach from this wide perspective is something that perhaps we could take for this session. So first of all, we'd like to turn to Mr. Ikeda. FSA's initiatives and transition finance, and the significance thereof, and policies to revitalize or your views of the present status. If you could refer to different aspects, please. Thank you very much. My name is Ikeda from the Financial Services Agency. As for the significance of transition finance, I'm sure you have all heard a lot about it up until the present, unless you're here for the first time today. And the concept was there since previously. Green finance, centered around green finance, sustainable finance. To the discussion concerning this, to steer toward decarbonization. The hard-to-abate sector has to be dealt with in the manufacturing process. Decarbonization is difficult for certain sectors. So inclusive of these sectors, for the economy as a whole, we have to make for transition. And that is important. And in order to increase this awareness, FSA and the government, and with the METI and with Environment Ministry, transition finance promotion has been something that we've been working on since 2019 and 2020. I think we have seen considerable results. That's my impression. Simply put, last year at the G20, transition finance challenges were taken up, and a sustainable finance working group under G20 discussed climate transition finance and came up with principles. And different policy recommendation entities. OECD has put together a report on transition finance, and I may be bragging a bit, blowing my own horn. IPSF, a sustainable finance international platform. There is such a thing. And EU and Switzerland and Japan co-chaired, and I was serving as a co-chair, and the transition finance report has been submitted. So policy-wise, it's an area that's becoming the center of much attention. And so that is something that I'm feeling. On the other hand, with regard to the theme this time within the capital markets, perhaps you're aware, environmental finance. There's a magazine by that name, and transition finance statistics are being compiled by them. In Luxembourg Exchange, or green finance or green bond related database is being created there. and transition finance as a category does not exist. So within the capital market, streamlining data, preparing data is not something that we have achieved yet. So within the capital market, to originate would be an issue of much difficulty as yet. And so green bond, the purpose of the use of the funds to be specified for green purposes. When we try to do that, the transition is such that you can say it's not green now, but it'll turn green later on. It's a greening process. So it may be cumbersome to explain that in some cases. So the use of funds, rather than the use of funds, the entity itself has a target for climate transition and is making efforts toward this end. And that is why it may be asking for funds. Sustainability-linked loans or bonds, that may be the form with which they are asked for financing. There may be things that are originated in that way. But in the real sense of the word, including Scope 3, climate transition, to have material indices to commit to climate transition is something that we are not able to do yet. And so to do something about this, we're trying different things. And that's my awareness of the present status. And so there are different policy measures that can be taken. One is climate-related information disclosure improvement thereof. TCFD, this was a voluntary process, which we have up until now with ISSB on the part of Japan. It could introduce this as a standard. I believe that will probably something that would happen. And the data which is available may increase. And so based on this, climate transition finance design will be created. And the transition is difficult. Of course, climate transition is not about, well, penetrating renewable energy itself is very difficult. It's not necessarily about existing technology. And what cannot be covered through existing technology, how do we veer toward the decarbonization? It's all about this. So we can carve out the initial part as a capital product. It can be originated, or inclusive of the commitments going forward. Perhaps we could embed that into the product. I think there are different creative ways. These difficult issues are something that financial institutions will come to grips with. So through regulation, it has to be pushed forward. It's not divestment per se. It's about the transition of the economy as a whole. The financial institutions must approach this, must grapple with this. And I think it's important for FSA to encourage that. Within a sustainable society, there's a committee on decarbonization. Within this committee, it's important to send messages, and that would lead to transition finance to grow on the capital market. GX economy transition bonds, there's talk about this. So along with this, if we can move forward with different approaches, I think that would be good. Thank you very much. At the exchange, we have a very close relationship with the FSA. And we engage in different operations and projects with the FSA. Within finance as a whole, the role that exchanges play is a limited role. But in the limited role that we play, we talk about different things with FSA. In the past several years, FSA has increased its menu. State Minister Fujimaru has discussed it to some degree earlier. All of a sudden, things are beginning to take shape. And so relationship with the government, cooperation between agencies. If we could say a word on this, I would appreciate that. Of course, climate transition finance guidelines. When we formulated this, METI and FSA and the Environment Ministry had a joint conference to study this issue. And recently, a financed emission. This is a technical issue. Financial institutions scope 3 emission disclosure. What to do about this, in particular transition finance promotion, in view of promotion, we have thought about this issue. And so I think we're collaborating in a very good way, and there may be gaps. Please do point it out if you feel that there are any gaps. Thank you very much. So, including specific projects, I believe the other two speakers are involved in different businesses and operations, so we'd like to hear from them. The business that you're pursuing now, perhaps you could briefly introduce that and talk about the present state of things. Maybe we can begin with Mr. Imai.
Yes, hello. My name is Imai from Norinchukin Bank. I'm stationed in London, but today, with this wonderful opportunity, I traveled back to Japan. So why am I assigned to London? Well, we're talking about sustainability and transition, and those are important factors as to why I'm in London. For Norinchukin Bank, as an investor, we would like to be in line with the global trends as we look to fulfill our responsibility as an investor. And so there are two sustainability officers at our bank, one in Tokyo, the other is in London, who's me. So Europe is advanced, so we want to closely monitor the trends and convey the information to Japan because we're a bank and an investor for our loan-related activities so that we can design them appropriately. We are feeding that information back to what we do here in Japan. So in terms of numbers, by 2030, 10 trillion yen of sustainable financing, ESG eligible financing is to be done by our bank. That's our target. That's our goal. For the past few years, every year, in excess of 1 trillion yen of loans and investments have been made. So I think we're on track with the plan, and our investment is diversified. So theme-based green bonds, or in terms of equities, low emission index-linked equities investment. So not just those popular instruments, but we want to increase carbon emission intensity reduction. So individual financing, green loans, we're making active investments in those securitized products, real estate properties. Are there any opportunities for us in those sectors? We're also looking. So for the asset classes that I mentioned, we already have sizable amounts of investments as well as loans. So we would like to continue with that effort. On the funding side, of course, we were able to issue a green bond for new technology, for example, hydrogen-related technology. We are providing financing for such new technology with respect to equity investment. We are an investor in some projects. Matsuda-san talked about creating friends and partners so that we can contribute on different fronts. We are looking for many different opportunities and addressing them. So that's what our bank is doing. And if I may touch upon the current status of transition finance from a person in Europe, macroeconomically. Well, I think we have made great progress in creating the momentum for transition finance in the last few years, which is quite desirable, which is quite good. But because last year many things happened, natural energy and food, I think focus shifted to those issues because of the incidents last year. But are we going to slow down our efforts on transition finance and environmental issues? There were such concerns expressed. Actually, if we look at ESG bond issuance, there is some slowdown that could be noted. Just a little bit, but that's because the bond market is volatile with the current interest rates, and issuers are waiting and seeing because of rising interest rates. Because of such economic reasons, the bond market is somewhat sluggish. And because of that, for the time being, let's not do bonds. We want loans as a bridge. We get such requests in Europe, and once the bond market settles, we want to issue bonds once again, they're saying. So the point is, well, we started to move toward transition finance, but then there were incidents, and now the rain has fallen. The soil is solidified, so there's societal demand and a need for decarbonization. What is the right balance? I think this has created an opportunity for us to pause and see what's really necessary. I don't think over the medium to long term the momentum is going to slow down being in Europe. Now that the soil is solidified, if the situation settles, once again, I think transition finance and efforts in this regard will continue to increase.
That was a very global view, and that was very interesting. Turning to Mr. Murakami, please.
Thank you very much. At Nomura Securities, I'm in charge of underwriting in general. My name is Murakami. We're talking about the capital markets. Rather than ESG in general, we ought to focus on transition finance in the universe of ESG. As indicated by IMAI-san, there are differences in the concept of transition finance between Japan and other countries, but the gap seems to be narrowing more recently. In Japan, as you know well, METI is engaged in roadmaps and providing support for subsidies to evaluating companies. And many Japanese operating companies are issuing transition bonds. But on global basis, transition finance, the concept itself has become rooted in other countries, but are there many issuances in the area of transition finance? The issuances are limited. Europe is implementing various policies to promote transition finance, and therefore transition finance might have been seen as rather deviating from the policy of the authorities. But recently, due to the roadmap, we think the environment is developing. CBI of UK has issued a report recently, and they took up transition finance, and not about Japan, but ASEAN. They took up transition finance of ASEAN, which I took as a big progress. So these will be accepted as markets. So what is the situation Japanese companies are placed with? And when we think about the roadmaps, this will be a repetition, but the concept of transition finance is very important as we move towards a decarbonized society. And the market, there's high level of interest amongst the issuing companies, and I talked about the support from the government. It's subject to green operation assistance by the BOJ, so investors can more easily invest, and we've seen progress in Japan. But in terms of further expanding the initiatives, green bonds, there's concern over greenwashing, and there was bashing over green bonds tentatively. Now, when one issue occurs, then there was, however, resolution of the issue, and market confidence improved, and that had led to the spread. And if the issuer can commit to decarbonization and the investor can become confident, then there could be the spread of this market. And issuing of reports through disclosure in order to gain the confidence of investors is the key. And I think that's where the ambiguity still exists in terms of transition bonds. What kind of investment disclosure should be done by the issuer, and what kind of disclosure would the investor want? That's unclear, so we're hopeful that the roadmap would identify those issues. We have with us Konuma-san, but Green Track has the function of direct reporting to the investors initiated by the TSE. So this could be part of the continuous information disclosure to make it easier for investors to participate and invest. So it could be one solution at any rate, not just in Japan, but in other countries. We need various measures in order to improve the confidence on transition finance so that transition finance would be interpreted as appropriate financing means. So as an intermediary, we would like to take those measures.
Thank you very much, Japanese issuers and investors. You're quite knowledgeable. You're the most knowledgeable about them. So thank you very much for that. We've had discussions about the present status, included, and with regard to future directions and challenges. If you could outline your thoughts or your impressions on this issue, we would be grateful. Starting with Mr. Ikeda, please. In creating transition finance, in terms of use of funds, what to spend the funds on, there is a transition element there. And also the entity itself, the corporate issue itself in 2030 or 2050 may set a certain target. And toward this year, they may make efforts. And the finance would be used for certain parts of their overall plan, and so the issuance is made. I think broadly speaking, there's a too. If you think in terms of green bond, you understand the use of funds, but in transition finance and designing that, the latter, that is toward the climate target, what kind of commitments would be made? And toward this end, what is the transition plan? And in what way will it be implemented? And for implementation purposes, a certain kind of capital investment or technology development would be necessary. And of course, when it comes to technology development, depending on the status of development of technology, there may be some which fail, which end in failure. So what METI, referring to the roadmap that METI created, what the kind of path would be pursued to achieve net zero? A dialogue with the investors would be important in procuring finance. So how to do this process well? As I mentioned earlier, climate-related disclosure, or based on this disclosure, the issuer's transition plan, discussion about what the transition plan should be. The UK has expressed its view. Internationally, the IOSCO is probably will be taking this up as a theme for discussion. And so when the menu is prepared, then people have a better idea of what the climate transition finance is about. We tend to be dragged by the discussion on taxonomy, of course, including transition element. There's a taxonomy design, but for transition finance to become something that is trusted, the 2050 Paris Agreement target must be kept in view. And to what extent the issuer would go toward this, that kind of reliability and confidence is necessary. to create something like, well, of course, there's the use of carbon credit, but the carbon credit market itself was to clarify the price level of carbon as a signal. That's important. And to what has been committed, what originally should be considered in terms of the Paris Agreement to exceed the reduction level, to be more ambitious about this, to realize that to purchase carbon credit would be a case which would emerge. In that sense, it would be meaningful. In this grand design, transition finance and carbon credit would be created as a market, and the FSA would like to promote this. Thank you. Thank you very much. The exchange side, in response to this, feels that for disclosure, it's very important. A lot of listed companies are saying this. 2015, the governance code was introduced, and 2021 code revision, prime standard growth, the new market division was made at the exchange, and sustainability disclosure strengthening was done through that. And this year, starting March of 2023, a sustainability disclosure would be included in the Securities report. And so how listed companies would take this seriously and to enhance the credibility of disclosure. As listed companies, we'd like to take this to heart to provide information. And on the credit market side, internationally, there are different developments. The signaling effect, as Mr. Ikeda called it, I believe that it would be useful. We hope that this would take root. And on the part of the exchange, this is something that we feel is an exchange. Thank you very much.
それでは今井様の方からもお願いできます。
Imai-san, please.
So from the investor's perspective, what are the challenges? There are many. Just to give an example. So how should we operate in line with what criteria? I'm sure lots of people are concerned about that. This is about roadmap, and we really have to take the long-term view going forward. Lots of rulemaking will happen, I'm sure, and I think we have come a long way in developing frameworks, but there are lots more to be determined. So how are we going to calculate emissions? And how are we going to harmonize our efforts with Europe, which is advanced? So much is yet to be determined. By the way, I think there are people from the EU among the audience, European people. When it comes to making rules internationally and applying the rules made internationally, they're very good at doing so. And we have to consider the special situation here in Japan, of course, but how to go about harmonizing with Europe and the rest of the world, we have to think very carefully. In terms of transition financing, what is the definition? There seems to be some variety. Well, from the investor's point of view, something that we thought qualified is no longer qualified. That does happen. And I'm sure rules will be changed going forward. And of course, we're doing this for the benefit of society. So based on conviction and values of each, whatever we think is good, we should not hesitate to pursue. I think that's fine. But in order to push for such positive efforts, the risk of cliff, if it can be mitigated, then people will be more assured and feel better. And this is not something that one individual investor can do. I hope TSE and the public sector, we hope to continue to collaborate so that the danger of the cliff will not be too large. That would be appreciated. And I talked about rulemaking. Well, there are weaknesses and strengths of corporations. Well, this is not part of the rules, but we are still making contribution on other fronts. Regardless of the rules, then if corporations are making a progress and something positive, they should pursue.
Thank you very much. Murakami-san, please.
I'm neither an issuer, I'm not an investor either, so my comments may not be persuasive, but we support both. So I think our mission is to vitalize the market. So let me make a comment from such perspective. Green. In comparison to green, I touched upon this already, but understanding towards the business activity is necessary, and I think that's a big challenge in transition finance. And as mentioned by Imai-san, even the bigger investors have a hard time gaining sufficient understanding, and I think that shows how difficult this area is. And if we apply this to many investors, it is a difficult area, and I think it's easy to imagine the complexity. So it's not a big problem yet, but what should we do in order to improve the situation in the future? This is a big challenge. Investors alone cannot solve the issue. And I think if we are to try to enlarge the market, it would be difficult just to depend on investors. So continuous improvement of transparency is the key. And one way to do that is to improve the report issued by evaluating organizations. And if the confidence and trust towards those reports is improved, then investors can rest assured in making their investment decisions and relying on those reports. And on the part of the security brokerage, including the issuers and evaluators, we engage in communication. We also communicate with the government. So, of course, we have to sustain the confidence. And what is the investor or the society, the general public, seeking? That has to be well understood by the issuer. So understanding has to be well established both ways. That's where we can help. So as a facilitator of two-way communication, we can play our role and try to find the right way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. The Evaluating Entity Code of Conduct, Japan has led the other countries and started it. I understand that it has been evaluated very highly. So I believe that creating the environment is important, including the peripheral areas. So last but not least, keywords. I would like to put up the keywords. So could we have a word from you each? Starting with Ikeda-san, could we have his keyword? Yes, thank you. We've been talking about transition finance and the significance of that. So I believe, including Europe, I think the understanding has spread. And that's very encouraging. Honestly speaking, individual institutional investors, when we look at them, there are some skeptical views which remain. And I feel that, of course, the policy authorities have enhanced their understanding. But when you look at investor stance, some are still suspicious and hesitating. And the reason is because there's a category called green. Why do you need to create a new category called transition? I think that's what the question is about. So what's green now? If we invest in what is green now, can that make the economic transition happen? There is that question. For example, you can originate a transition bond to finance. You cannot perhaps call it green at this moment, but 5 years or 10 years from now or 25 years from now, in steps, gradually it may change, and we want people to finance that change. Just looking at the next 5 years. If I put it, say it in a bad way, maybe it's financing the underdog. People will feel it's financing the underdog. But you have to feel that through this finance, you want to create a net zero future. That kind of enthusiasm is called into question. Different rules, and then the policy makers need to give the push. But you need to have the enthusiasm to say this is good, so we would invest. And we want to have the issuers have the same mindset. I will procure transition finance by creating the future. That kind of mindset is what we wish to see in transition finance. And I think this is an important way of perceiving things, and that is why I chose the word creating the future. Thank you very much, Imai-san.
I talked about standards and rules that they are unclear. I'm sorry for being trivial. Transition finance, as its namesake, we are talking about the environment. It's not our goal to hit the numbers. To create a sustainable planet and make the planet green, we're going to facilitate change, and transition finance is for that. That is the most important goal. So we always need to come back to the goal, to the basics. And we're talking about the environment. Essentially, one country alone cannot do everything. So this has to be a universal endeavor. So in order to bring about change, how do you think about this? Several years from now, this is the kind of society we want to create. It's a vision or values. It all boils down to values. So sharing, I use the word sharing in my closing comment. We want our planet to be like this. We need to have a shared vision. And otherwise, we won't be able to agree upon standards and rules. We will get nowhere if we don't have shared vision. So we need to have global discussions and share values. As a result, we can come up with an agreed upon standard. And so if we can reach that, people will feel assured to make investments and issue bonds and so forth. And if Japan can do that, Tokyo can become an active financial center. Its potential will rise. So to share values, we should not be righteous. We should not just follow others. So let's share this broadly, come to an understanding so that we can land on what is good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Murakami-san, please.
I wondered what would be the best wording. Nomura uses this logo, in other words, contribution to the creation of a truly rich society through the financial market. So I borrowed part of our Nomura's vision. But what do we mean by truly rich society? I think each has its own definition, so your definition is all very different, and the path or process to that destination may be different depending on who you ask. I don't think that was the intention of the company when they decided on this vision, but that was my impression, and that's why I chose these words. Generally speaking, hey, let's do this. There's no one who's objecting to that major goal, but when it comes to how, do you just jump to that final destination? Someone talked about phased and gradual walking versus jet flying to the top. And there could be companies that would have to use fossil fuel in the interim. In Japan, we have many large emitting companies, so this will be a truly fundamental issue. And Imai-san talked about values. And in terms of sharing of value, when we think about how, we cannot just think about the investor's perspective, but we have to have global shared notion. So first, in Japan, we have to have robust principles And based upon those principles, secure transparency and have the market respond and have a functioning market towards that end. And then if that kind of concept is shared globally, that could become a very practical and realistic roadmap. Our company, of course, has a set goal of corporate level emissions reduction, which is not that big. So what we are sought is cooperating as a financial intermediary to emissions reduction, or offering added value to contribute to emissions reduction, or expansion of the market, or improving the soundness of the market. I talked about the report and the health or soundness of the market. So if we can have the stakeholders be persuaded that there is soundness, then there could be better communication and confidence. So when we say truly rich society, if we can share the image of where we want to be as the final destination, then I think we can contribute as a financial intermediary.
Thank you very much. I have also written a word. I didn't do much thinking. What the three panelists have said, the market and financial mechanism through these to achieve is the hope that I have, and I share this with the other panelists. If you boil it down, what drives transition is businesses and business activities. Through the world of finance, there are different tools and different products. How do we provide finance? Where does the money come from? It comes from the citizens. It's deposits and the pensions. And in various forms, citizens provide the money, and we're circulating the money. And the citizens are providers of funds. They're also consumers, and they conduct a living, and they are employees of companies. And so everything, we hope that we can create a system where everything works smoothly. Thank you very much to all. Could we have a big hand for the panelists, please? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Could you please step down from the stage? To the panelists and to Mr. Konuma, the moderator, thank you very much. After this, it's the last part of the program. Mr. Hiroshi Nakaso, chairman of FinCity Tokyo, will give a summary.